So recently I picked up a Notes Captor X, and it seemed like the perfect time to get into something that I feel like is one of the most ignored and overlooked aspects of your guitar tone, and that's your speakers and cabinets. And I think I'm going to add microphones onto that as well. It doesn't matter if you have one of the best amp heads in the world, if you're not meshing it with a cabinet and speaker that works for that amplifier and gets the sound that you want, you're not going to get the desired result. Now, for a long time, I was recording with my Mesa 212 loaded with British V30s, and that was great for a while, but I have roommates and I have neighbors, and that's really loud and impractical. So for a long time now, I've been recording going into the Notes Captor, the old one, into the cab pedal from that, and that's how I've been getting my sound. The Captor X, however, is like both of these combined, but with more features. Notes have really done a lot to make this user-friendly for both gigging musicians and recording musicians. Now on the back of this unit, you're going to see that it has two different outputs, and that allows for a lot of cool different routing options and sounds. First off, you can go out in full stereo, which is really cool if you have any of the reverbs that are built into this unit going. What I like about it is you can go with a wet-dry blend. You can have your wet signal that's being processed by the IRs, and you can have a dry signal from the amplifier just with the amp head itself, not affected by any cabinet tone, going straight into your recording software. This is awesome if you want to go back later, if you feel like the tone isn't quite right or you need to change something. You can go in and add different IRs, use some of the other Notes software, and change things as much as you want later on. And one of the other cool features is this has what's called the twin tracker. It's a doubler for your signal, and this is really cool for live musicians, especially guys that are the only guitar player in the band. One signal will be you playing, and then the other signal will be a slightly affected doubled signal of you to make it sound like you have this big full two guitar player sound. Some other cool stuff for gigging musicians is that you can just have all your presets ready to go. You can select between 6 on the front with a dial and be set up and ready to go. But more than that, if you do need to tweak something live, they've added different options for that. First off, you can use your phone now to control it. You don't need a laptop. You don't need to open up the program in your laptop. It has an app so you can control and tweak things in case something goes wrong or isn't quite right. Something I feel is a really good idea is they added a voicing knob on the front of the unit, and that essentially is like a mid-shift, kind of mid-control, and that'll really help you dial into whatever venue in the PA that you're playing, because not all PAs and speakers and rooms sound the same. Some might have a bit of an unpleasant kind of honky mid-range, or some might be a little thin or kind of scoop sounding, and you can dial that in to get the ideal sound that you want with that voicing knob. So that's enough about me talking about the unit. Let's actually hear some tones. Let's go over to the program. All right, so here's my main cab. This is what you hear in a lot of different recordings. This is my Mesa 212 with British V30s. I have it mic'd with an SM57, like just between the cone and the center of the speaker. And I have a ribbon microphone on there for some of the low end. This is what you normally hear in most of my videos. I'm playing through my EVH Stealth 50 watt. Pretty chunky. As you can see on here, I really like having the reverb on here a little bit. Now, this isn't anything you'd really hear. This is to kind of set up the reverb room reflections that you'd have in a real recording that your microphones would pick up. Without it on, it's a little dry. It's nothing really that you'd notice, but it makes everything feel more real, if that makes sense. Especially within the recording, everything feels like it was recorded in a room and not through any kind of software or anything digitally. So I'm going to turn it on and off, and you can kind of hear what I'm saying. It just sounds like it has a little bit more life to it. Now, in regards to using a 212 over a 412, I actually tend to really prefer the 212. It's a little bit darker, so it tames some of that high end. There's a little bit more going on the low end, especially the low mid-range for those nice chunky chugs and rhythm sections, and it has a lot more present mid-range, something I really like with a lot of my recordings. I'm going to show you the difference between this and the 412 Mesa, and really should show you, I mean, these are the same speakers. I have it mic'd up with the same exact microphones in the same exact position, but you're going to hear a pretty big difference, and it should show pretty clearly how the cabinet plays a pretty big difference in your sound. So as you can see there, a pretty big difference. There's a lot more going on the top end. It's a little bit fizzier. It's a bit wider sounding. There's a little less going on the low end. It's a little bit tighter, much less mid-focused, at least in the lower mids. And I tend to prefer this cabinet actually with my dual rectifier, but for most of my recordings, I like the 212. Now I'm going to show you what this sounds like with the dual rec versus the 212. A dual rectifier, as we all know, has a lot of muddy low end to it. It can be a bit much, so having an amplifier that is darker and emphasizes the low end is just going to make it sound kind of fat and muddy and maybe not the best of ways. So this cabinet actually goes a long way to tame that, and I'm going to switch back and forth between the two so you can hear that. So yeah, definitely cleans it up. Definitely takes away some of that low end, makes it sound a lot wider. I definitely like this cabinet better with the dual rectifier, but overall I use the 212 a lot with my recordings, and it sounds just amazing and huge and chunky on my EVH50 Stealth. So this is more for clean sounds. We're on the clean channel, the dual rectifier, and this is an old Vox AC30. I believe it's loaded with Blueback Celestians, I think. And it just gets this nice, warm, kind of bright, pretty clean sound. It's really good for overdrives. But it's kind of dry. There's not a whole lot going on there. So what we can do is we can play around with some of the reverbs in here. You have a bunch of different studios, a basement, loft, hall, the crypt, which gets really cool, the cathedral, which I really like. And then it has like these plate and spring reverbs. Let's play around with a couple of these. I really like the plate reverb. It gets this nice, pretty kind of vintage sound. Ooh, I really like that. Just that big, huge, epic, swelling reverb kind of gets lost in it. You add a couple delays and some other stuff to that. Definitely get lost in that in some post rock. So here's a cabinet I like to use. It's loaded with Eminent Swamp Thing speakers. Now they're big, fat. I mean, as the Swamp Thing, it's a big, fat, huge speaker. It's nasty. And normally I wouldn't like it on semi-distorted tones, but it sounds really, really good with fuzz. And I have this gate on here. If I didn't, you'd hear everything from the amplifier just. So it's a pretty good gate, and it definitely helps out with what we're doing here. Now I have a few things going on here to kind of tame some of this sound. First of all, I have an EQ going. I roll off a little bit, basically everything below 82 Hertz to kind of clean up some of the rumble and mud. I got a little bit going on here around 500. I just clip a couple of dB at around 500 Hertz. It gets rid of some of that kind of woodiness, and I'll go through all of these and kind of show you what I'm doing. I clip out about a dB at 4K. 4K is where a lot of the kind of nastier stuff lives, especially with high distorted tones. And then I clip off a couple of dB just after 10,000 to kind of clean it up. So I'm going to show you with and without, and I'm going to pull around some knobs and you can hear what I'm cutting and why. So you can see they're just little changes, but they make a really big difference. It gets rid of a lot of the honkiness, a lot of the mud, a lot of the harshness. It's more of stuff I would do, say, in a mix if I was recording, but it's something I can definitely have for, say, a live tone or just jamming. I can fix things before they either get recorded or somebody were to hear them at a show. So let's move on to the enhancer. The enhancer, I don't have going on full wet. I just have it just sweetening things a little bit. It adds a little bit of harmonic distortion to select frequencies on the low end, the mid range, and the top end. Now, there, as you can hear, there's already plenty of top end going on. I have it enhancing the low end a little bit just to add some of that thickness. So let's hear what it's doing on and off. Then I can play around with that and you can hear what it does. So yeah, as you can hear there, it just adds a little bit of distortion to certain frequency ranges to make them pop. And because this was a fuzz, I decided to emphasize the low end a bit. It has a little bit of mid emphasis, a little bit high end emphasis, but mostly that low end to just add that girth and fullness. So as you can see, there are a ton of different tones available in this thing. So many different options. I barely scratched the surface. You could sit here and tweak this thing for hours, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of why this thing has really helped me out and really streamlined my process. Basically everything you're going to hear on the channel going forward, if it's a tube amp, I'm playing it into my Captor X. It's just the easiest and most convenient way to get the exact studio sound that I want. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Stay metal.